welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from my little nutshell of infinite space, my television studio apartment right here in the Wood of the Holly, under the sign, overlooking this COVID-scarred land of law. Extremely special guest. I count him as a friend. He is a modern-day Maimonides. By that, I mean the person, not the disease, has to be taken into account. He's with me today. He's a friend. We did a show in April of 2020. I want to follow up on that. Welcome, Dr. David Schechter. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, thanks. And I'm glad to be here with you and healthy.
Yes, there's a lot to be thankful for. What's your just base takeaway beyond gratitude, which I feel also?
Well, if you're alive, there's gratitude. And at the same time, I understand that your listeners and I feel we would like this to be over. You know, we want it to be over. And I understand that feeling. And maybe people are going to fast forward the segment because they just are tired of hearing about COVID. But when I think back to a year and a half ago, literally 18 months when we spoke in April of 2020, we knew relatively little about the disease. We had very little in the way of treatments. There were, unfortunately, a lot of people dying at that point. And obviously the vaccines were still in the planning stage. They were not at all even being probably tested yet at that point. So a lot has happened since then, and yet this goes on and on. And so why has it gone on so long? Well, the virus is a nasty virus. We could perhaps talk into where it came from or where it may not have come from, but it's a nasty virus and it's mutated in a way. The Delta variant that we're dealing with now is very contagious. And I don't know that it's any worse than the original Wuhan version, but it's certainly more contagious. In Los Angeles County, where we both live, we've seen the burst of cases in July, August into early September of COVID. And now the numbers have dramatically dropped into October, which is great over here. There's other parts of the country that have dropped. There's some parts of the country like Hawaii and Alaska that still are fairly high. The Delta variant is so contagious that if you're not immunized, it just kind of rips through the population. If you are immunized, there are breakthrough cases, although in my experience in people under 45, the cases are very mild. In people over 45, it's a little more of a variable if you do have a breakthrough case. Most cases, again, you stay out of the hospital with the vaccine, so that's one of the benefits. But you can get kind of sick. Of course, we now have those monoclonal antibodies as well, which not enough people are using, not enough doctors are prescribing, not enough patients are aware of. If you have them getting into that mild to moderate case, and especially if you're at more risk. So it's been quite a run these last 18 months. And all of us who have stayed healthy should be very thankful for that.
People ask me, well, what was the side effects you had when you got your first Pfizer shot? And I said, the main side effect I had was incredible gratitude. My stress level went down incredibly. And on the other side, I felt like I pitched 4 or 5 innings, at Dodger Stadium. I had a little sore shoulder, not quite the Max Scherzer level, but that was sort of the package.
We did have a feeling at that point, you know what? It's going to be over. People are going to get vaccinated. We're going to have herd immunity and we're going to be done with this thing, at least in the United States and then eventually around the world. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that.
Right.
And I know that's a disappointment for people, and it's a disappointment for me as well. It's not that the science is bad. It's just that the virus is very nasty. It's just a bad virus. And again, its ability to mutate. At this point, while they're working on a variant booster, to my knowledge, they haven't been testing it yet, and it's certainly not being mass produced. That would make a lot of sense to me as a doctor/scientist that the next shot we get, it may not be the booster this month or next month, but the next shot we get, if we do have another shot to get, I would like to get a variant booster that covered me for the changes in this spike protein that make it more contagious, and the Delta plus and all of these kind of variants. So that's what we're up to with that.
And that's sort of what goes on every year with the flu shot. We're trying to mix and match and anticipate where these things are going to go. So
it's believed that the Spanish flu of 1918, 1919 probably mutated into what's called the seasonal flu now that goes around the world. It's a milder version. Obviously, more people have immunity or partial immunity. We have a vaccine to help us as well. We have obviously more advanced medical care, but the Spanish flu sort of like never disappeared. It just became a milder seasonal flu.
Right.
COVID may do the same. There's no way to actually predict it exactly, but COVID may be around with us in one version or another. But again, much of the population at least in the Western world and eventually in the whole world, hopefully we'll have built up immunity, and it may do its little mutating and tricks and try to sneak in there every year. But, we may have an annual flu shot that includes a COVID shot at that point for the variants or whatever is around, or it may disappear. There's really no way to predict.
Yeah, it's actually a thrilling moment to be alive because we're getting a front row seat to science in real time. There's a level of it that's just exceedingly interesting. We're seeing like evolving races between human intelligence and viral evolution, this clash.
You say it very dramatically. I think many people would prefer to hand in those front row seats and maybe to a scalper and give it to somebody else. But
that's true. Speaking of sports metaphors, if you were up there looking at this COVID contest, what yard line are we on? Are we as humanity, are we close to the goal line? Are we in field goal range to defeating this thing? Do you have any sense of where we are?
Humanity is 7 billion people, and we know that the southern hemisphere hasn't been, well vaccinated as far as Africa, large parts of India, certain parts of South America. And there's large areas of the globe that are not well vaccinated. We don't have good data to see how many people have gotten sick in these parts of the world. We don't have good data to see how many people have immunity in these parts of the world. So I would say in the United States, we're probably in field goal range, somewhere between a long to a medium field goal. And in Europe, probably 5 yards behind. And in South America, 10 or 15 yards behind, and in Africa, still haven't crossed midfield. So got a ways to go.
Seems like Asia might be right at the first and goal. They seem to, especially like places like Vietnam, and maybe Singapore seem to have done pretty well in terms of their social discipline and managing this.
Some countries in Asia have done very well, but the problem with postponing this disease in some way, and this we could talk about the Swedish model versus the Australian model. I mean, Australia and New Zealand have done a great job keeping their population fairly free of COVID. But the problem is now they are vaccinating finally. They were a little bit behind, but they're catching up on the vaccinations. But the question is, has there been enough exposure to their population to COVID to create an immunity, a base of immunity? You'd like to be able to do that just with vaccination. Maybe that'll happen, especially if there's a variant booster in 2022. But some of these populations are still at risk, in my opinion. China did a very good job, allegedly, early on after the initial outbreak, where they sealed buildings shut and did that sort of thing to keep people from spreading it, at least in China. But then they've supposedly had outbreaks since then. So it's a nasty virus. You can keep it down. We had times in the United States we thought we really had it down. Oh, it's going to be the summer, it'll be better or whatever. And then it shoots up again. It doesn't seem to care about the season. It doesn't seem to care about a lot of things. And it doesn't seem to care about 60% vaccination rate. Maybe you got to get to 90, or maybe you have to get to 70 vaccination plus 20 of the 30% that didn't get vaccinated have to get the virus. Maybe it stops spreading because there just aren't enough people for it to bounce to.
So it's what price immunity? My sister's anti-vax radical Shiite Taliban, and the virus swept through her household. And thank God she recovered. And now she's very confident about her natural immunity.
I think the people who are the safest are those who had COVID plus got at least one shot. Now, I'm not telling you to get COVID if you've had one shot or two shots. I'm not telling you to go out and get COVID.
Right.
There's one recent radio host who apparently has been insisting he's trying to get COVID. This is stupidity. But if you happen to have had COVID, recovered from it, and you got at least one shot or two, I think that group of people is probably the safest.
Now, is there a way to kind of quantify and see that when they do, the blood testing with serology testing to see the level of protection that you have? Is that clear? There's like statistical numbers.
Yeah, it's clear, but it's not as good as it could be. I mean, I've been doing some serology testing on patients in the office, and the lab that I use, which I think is a very good lab, I'm not going to mention their name on the show. Mm-hmm. They give me a score. So basically, every patient I've tested but one who has been vaccinated has had well above 10 on the level of antibodies. They consider in that lab under 1 to be you don't have any antibodies. The only person who was below 1 was a man who was on a medication that suppresses the immune system in order to help his other medical condition.
Right.
So I recommended to him to get a booster, even though it was a couple months ago, and I believe he's had one.
Yeah.
So at least from what I'm testing, and despite the fact that some of the research suggests that after 6 months the Pfizer and maybe after 8 to 9 months the Moderna, your antibody and immune system immune levels drop. all the people I've tested have, including I've tested myself, have substantial levels of antibodies on testing 6 and 8 months after the shot. That brings back what you were saying before we got on the show about the gray area of boosters.
When we were talking the other day, you mentioned that, hey, if you get the shingles vax and the flu vax, some of these other antiviral vaccines, that they actually do have sort of a cumulative protective effect against COVID as well. In other words,
there's some data that suggests that if you get any vaccine in the last few months or whatever, you're less likely to get a severe case of COVID. And it may make sense that it's just kind of like every time we get a vaccine, our immune system wakes up, turns on the lights, right? It's like an automatic light in your driveway and it goes on. And then it's kind of ready to go on again in the future if it has to. It burns off the cobwebs on that light outside your driveway.
Interesting.
Any kind of shot helps. And that's why they're also saying if you can get a flu shot and the COVID booster the same day, if you do that. You can get a shingle shot and the flu shot the same day. You can get a shingle shot and the COVID shot the same day. So I'm not always recommending that, but I do recommend the flu with the COVID. Shingles can sometimes knock you down for a couple of days. So if you're over 50 and your doctor recommends a shingle shot, I would not personally do that the same week as I did the COVID shot.
I'm due for the shingle shot. So that's my next one. Then I'm going to grab the booster. I don't think I'll do them the same day, but this falls into this thing that we talked about and you just mentioned, which is this gray area where actually good sense and judgment come into play. And I guess we're living, especially in the realm of boosters, we're living.
Yeah, so if you've been vaccinated, and I recommend that everybody be vaccinated, and I still recommend everybody be vaccinated. If you're 65 and older, that group makes the most sense, especially if you have health issues or you're 70 and older. It makes the most sense to get a booster. I strongly recommend those folks get a booster. So if you've had 2 Pfizers, you can either get a Pfizer booster or Moderna booster.
Okay, so that would be a question I would have. I've got 2 Pfizers.
You can now mix and match. You can mix and match. Now, if you had 2 Modernas and you had a really strong reaction to one of them, and interesting enough, most older people don't have a really strong reaction. They get maybe a sore arm, but they don't usually get like the flu-like symptoms for a day or two.
Right.
If you had an unusually strong reaction, which is more common with the Moderna, then I suggest the third shot be a Pfizer.
Even if you had the Pfizers, if I had 2 Pfizers?
No. If you had 2 Modernas and you had a really strong reaction that maybe knocked you out for too long, then do the Pfizer as your booster.
Right.
The other thing is the Moderna company did a smart thing, which I've been talking about for a while, that they lowered the amount of medicine of mRNA in the booster from the 100 to the 50. And I think that makes a lot of sense because people got a pretty strong reaction a lot of times to that second Moderna shot. The Pfizer only has 30 micrograms. So to compare, half of 100 is 50, it's still more than 30. And it's just about the same things. So you can mix and match, or you can just take a third of the same one. Now, if you're between 50 and 65, and by the way, being a male is a slightly higher risk of getting more severe COVID. But if you're between 50 and 65 and you have health issues, or you're working in the health field, or you're certain jobs, you have a lot of exposure to the public, then I think a booster is reasonable as well.
Right.
You can do the J&J, you can do the Pfizer, or you can do the Moderna. If you've had previous J&J, you can do another J&J, or you can do Pfizer and Moderna. So let me talk about younger people under 50 or under 45. It's definitely more of a judgment call. If you've had the 2 shots, you decide not to get a booster, I can respect that. I can understand that.
Right.
If you're a young woman and you had the J&J shot, I do not recommend you get another J&J booster. And that's because we have enough evidence now that although the risk is low, the risk is highest for blood clots among young women who get J&J. So I recommend your second shot. If you want to get a booster, let's say you're a 28-year-old nurse, get a Pfizer or get a Moderna. Don't get a J&J. If you're a young man between 20 and 35 or so, I would not get the Moderna booster. I'd get the Pfizer. And the reason for that is there's some data, and again, it's rare, but there's an increased risk of that myocarditis in young men. So with the Moderna, but not with the Pfizer and not with the J&J. So you can get either the J&J or you can get the Pfizer for your booster. So this is just kind of fine tuning the boosters. However, if you're 35 and you're a man and you're healthy and you had 2 shots, I'm not sure you need a booster.
As a caveat to everything you're saying, because you're measuring risk between this shot and this booster at this age, but the overwhelming risk is to get COVID. And that's as opposed to the risks associated with getting these.
Exactly. All of these shots and that's well put. All these shots and even all these boosters are still lower risk than getting a case of COVID, especially if you're over 45 or 50, because those tend to be the more severe cases, which is not to say there haven't been a few extremely severe cases in 30-year-olds, but it's rare.
Right.
So the biggest risk is COVID. That's why everybody should be vaccinated, because it never made any sense to say, I'm afraid of this vaccine, which has been given to hundreds of millions of people now around the world. It's not like 3 people have tested it. I mean, it's been given to hundreds of millions of people. And we don't see people in Australia or Germany dropping dead in the streets from this vaccine. It's just not happening, right?
Right.
So the overwhelming risk is to get COVID and be unvaccinated. And that can lead to bad consequences. I had a man in his 40s who chose to be unvaccinated. He got COVID. This was a couple months ago. And he ended up in the hospital. Fortunately, he improved after 5 days and was sent home. But what made it even worse is that his wife had a young baby, and she got it from him too. And she was pregnant, and neither one of them was vaccinated. They had made that decision, not with my consent or approval, but they made their own decision. And, she's home with a little baby and she's pregnant and she's got COVID. It's not like she could call up a babysitter and say, hey, can you come on over? I've got COVID. I got to lie down in the other room.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's coming over for that. I mean, you need like a nurse in full medical gear with a respirator to do that. So she really had to struggle through those 5 days. So in addition to the risk of hospitalization for the man in his 40s, the wife, who is a little bit younger, but she had a moderate case and she still had to take care of a baby. So there are life consequences to getting COVID that I think the vaccine reduces dramatically. I mean, even if you get a mild case, you have to miss a week to 10 days from work and stay out of the public eye, so to speak, which you've seen athletes having to miss the World Series or playoffs or this sort of thing because they get a positive test and they didn't get vaccinated, perhaps. You and I are both pro-vaccine. We're just talking about some of the fine points of the boosters for some of the people who might want to think about it.
Right. I think a lot of people have a hard time rationally assessing risk. I've dealt with a huge struggle within my own family. My sister, she is so stridently and aggressively anti-vax. There is no space in her head to even talk to her that and she's aggressive in terms of her point of view, and she's influenced others in my family and scared the bejesus out of them. So this is something for me, dealing with the whole anti-vax thing, that is personal. It's not just an abstraction of, those people over there.
It's bad enough we have a virus, but the idea that it would tear apart families or would tear apart our society in terms of politics is really something that I don't think could have been predicted and is a terrible add-on to this already deadly disease.
Yeah, that's the biggest surprise. When I spoke to you in April of 2020, I had no clue that this virus, which originally started around masking and then morphed into the people's attitude towards the vaccine, would be a political dividing point in our society. To me, that was the hugest surprise out of this. I did not anticipate that.
That's a huge surprise, mistake, irony, whatever you want to call it. The virus has been more nasty than many of us thought in terms of just surviving this long and obviously killing so many people and mutating into the Delta variant, which is more contagious.
Yeah. We survived this AIDS things, in the 90s and the latter part of the 80s. So much research and science went into getting a handle on that. They never got a vaccine. They seem to have effective treatment. And conversely, with the COVID, we don't seem to have a cure, but we have very effective vaccines. That strikes me as an interesting sort of outcome.
Yeah, well, I think the audience should be aware that in terms of treatment, the most effective treatment is people who are in higher risk of a severe case. So that would typically be by age or coexisting morbidities, as they call them. You can get the monoclonal antibody infusion. The government pays for it. It's $2,000. The government pays for it. So you speak to your physician, and they can usually, if they're connected with a hospital, get you hopefully hooked up with the monoclonal antibodies. Now, I wouldn't do this if I'm 22 and I have the sniffles. I'm thinking more about a 50, 60, or 70-year-old person who gets a breakthrough infection and has maybe hypertension or heart disease and wants to avoid the risk of ending up being hospitalized. So the antibody infusion is very powerful. The second thing that they're working on, but it's not readily available and not available other than research, is an oral treatment like Tamiflu for the common flu. That's going to be about $700. Presumably the government may pay for that as well. And that's going to be a series of pills that you take. And I think that's exciting information. It's not going to be knock it out cold, but it's going to reduce your risk of hospitalization or more severe case. There's also remdesivir, which was a antiviral infusion, IV, intravenous, that was developed for Ebola. But it turns out that it has some capability to fight this virus. And then steroids have some capability to fight this virus if you get a moderate to severe case. The other thing that's interesting is a medicine for OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, fluvoxamine, which is very inexpensive, actually costs pennies a pill, not 700 for a course, not 2,000 for an infusion. Fluvoxamine has been shown in a number of studies because it has anti-inflammatory properties, not because it makes you less OCD. Right. That's the usual use of it, but they realized that it seems to prevent that storm that can happen, that immune storm that can send you into a terrible pulmonary state and can be hospitalized or even worse. So they've done studies on this. They're probably going to start using this more in poorer countries. The main risk of this fluvoxamine is it could kind of throw off your mind a little bit while you're taking it because you're giving it in fairly high doses quickly, whereas normally when we put people on psych meds, we do it slowly and build it up. But I don't know if your viewers know about that, but that's something that has been shown to be effective, fluvoxamine. Again, I'm not routinely prescribing it because it has some side effects. And I'm monitoring my patients closely on the video calls to see that they're doing okay and they don't need it. And if they need something, I'm usually going to the monoclonal antibodies. The other thing is baby aspirin. Blood clots are one of the consequences of COVID. And all you need is some baby aspirin to reduce your risk of getting a blood clot. So these are therapeutics that we can use, even though they don't, knock it out. That they reduce your risk of getting sicker, and some of them are more powerful than others. But hopefully, more medications will be used. I know they've tested ivermectin over and over again. It does not seem to be effective, despite some claims. They've tested that lupus medicine that was used a little bit at the beginning. And that doesn't seem very effective. But fluvoxamine does actually seem pretty effective. Just kind of a crazy pill to take for a viral infection, and a medicine against OCD.
So there's a toolbox that's emerging in terms of treating people that have it. There is an emerging toolbox. I think the newspapers and the public and there's a cure. We cured cancer, like big headline type things. But maybe the reality is, we can manage things and we have a toolbox to kind of deal with it without the big sort of headline cure in bold letters. Maybe that's
just buying a $20 or sometimes it's $10 a pulse ox machine. If you're at risk or if you get sick, send a non-infected friend to get one for you or order it from a pharmacy or online. So the simple pulse oximeter you put on your finger. If your numbers go below 92, you need to go to the emergency room. And if your numbers stay around 95, 97, this is your...
Oh, yeah, I have that. The oxygen, that reads your oxygen level.
Yeah, it measures your oxygen saturation on your finger. Used to be only in hospitals. Now you can get them cheaply in...
I got one at Walgreens. I mean, the second this thing hit, I got the blood pressure thing, the cuff, I got the oxygen finger thing. I said...
Always prepared, Bill. That's what you...
because I could just imagine me going... Well, my numbers are this, I could just give you numbers or, whomever.
Yeah, it really does help because, when I have a patient who says to me, I'm doing 95, 97, I go, you're okay. Just monitor that. You're doing all right. Obviously, there's other things we follow as well, but that number is very helpful. So there's ways to monitor at home. Obviously, telemedicine is a huge boon that we didn't have that in the Spanish flu. The doctor had to come to your house and expose himself. Maybe wear a cotton mask because that's what they did in those days. But now we have video monitoring and video calls and telemedicine. And so there's ways to monitor people with mild cases. And then the emergency room is the best place to go if you have a moderate or severe case so they can evaluate you and see if you need to be in the hospital or go home. The emergency rooms have figured out ways to do this and separate you from other patients. So if you have to go to the emergency room for a heart attack, you're not going to be in the COVID ward. You're going to be protected from those individuals with COVID, and all the doctors and nurses are masked and everything. So emergency rooms are not a dangerous place to go to. That's been a problem in some countries that people have avoided getting care for other health issues, a stroke, a heart attack, appendicitis, and they could die of those things because I don't want to get COVID in the hospital.
Right. The other diseases haven't taken the day off because COVID.
Yeah. So in April 2020, it made sense, stay out of the hospital because we don't know what the hell's going on. But now after 18 months, we know what's going on. And we know how to keep you safe. I feel like my office, knock on wood, has been one of the safest places to be during this pandemic. Where the staff is masked, we're sanitizing, we do our check-ins. This, Bill, we do our check-ins on the phone. So when you come in, you get your vital signs, you go into a private room, and you see the doctor hopefully pretty soon. I don't keep people waiting a long time. We have air filtration in every room. In addition to the building filtration, we have air filters, HEPA filters. By the way, that's another thing that's been underemphasized in this pandemic. I don't think Fauci talks about it enough for anybody else, which is if you have an open door and you have a fan blowing out at a rapid rate, even that helps to keep the COVID out, gets the air circulating. If you have a $50 HEPA filter, that's high emission particulate, whatever they call it, you buy a filter. That also has been shown to filter the virus. Now, if you have 30 people in the room and there's a small HEPA filter, it's not going to make you safe. But if you have a HEPA filter or two running, powerfully, and you have a couple people over, it's going to dramatically increase your safety. Keeping the doors and windows open, obviously, in climates where you can do that is extremely helpful. And you can upgrade your house filters in terms of what grade filter they are, and that makes a difference. So we don't talk enough about air filtration. All of the schools should have been upgraded. Some were and some weren't. But during that time, the schools were closed. We should have had every janitor at every school putting in, up to date, the high end air filters that could make schools safer. So that wasn't emphasized enough, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and there was a conception early on, maybe, is that you could get it by surfaces and touching. But I'm feeling that maybe was overemphasized, that the overwhelming danger was airborne.
Yeah, it's a breathing thing. You don't want to get it in your nose. If you touch something and put your hands in your nose, you might get it. But primarily, it's about getting it in the nose and the mouth.
When I first went to my supermarkets, I had the goggles, the gloves. I was ready to kick, double mask, KN95, the whole thing. I'm ready. But
yeah, you were ready. Either you were a serial killer or you were trying to prevent from COVID. I couldn't tell which one. Hey, you want to talk about research in mind-body medicine a little bit?
Well, I wanted to dovetail there. I was right there with you because there's obviously been a psychic dimension to our COVID experience, and trauma and fear and people shut in, which ties into the mind-body discipline, which you got your original training from Dr. Sarno, Dr. John Sarno in New York, who wrote famously The Mind-Body Prescription. I think it just bears reintroducing the fundamentals of what that is for people that may not know.
Well, I've probably seen more mind-body disorders in the last 18 months than before. Mm-hmm. I think two reasons. One is just the stress of the pandemic. And the other is that telemedicine has opened up my ability to speak to people in other states, legally, because I'm now, during the emergency, doctors are kind of like grandfathered into being licensed in all the states and things like that. So it's opened it up for me. But as you know, and some of the audience may know, in addition to being family medicine and sports medicine and having the private practice in Culver City, I'm also known for the work I do with chronic pain and other psychophysiologic disorders using an approach that is more educational and psychological than it is physical, which is, physical is what I do with the acute injuries, the weekend warriors and the athletes. But when it comes to pain that persists 6 or 12 months, it often has more to do with the mind and brain than it does with the back or the neck. And so there's been exciting new research published by colleagues of mine in this field who I'm regularly in touch with. There was a study done in Boulder, Colorado that was published in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association psychiatry version. And it talks about just incredibly high success rates that they got with the approach that I've used for decades now. In their controlled study, they also did brain imaging that correlated with it in terms of people getting better and the blood flow in the brain changing. There was another study done in Boston by an emergency room doctor that shows tremendous results that was published. So there's been a lot of exciting research coming out. There was an article in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago by Nathaniel Frank, who talks about positive experiences that he and others have had. I wrote a comment in response to that article, and there were apparently 1,400 comments, and someone who reviewed them, who is executive director of the Psychophysiologic Disorders Association, on which I'm on the board of directors, she said that the vast majority of the comments were negative because people don't really read the article. They see something and they go, oh, they're saying it's in my head.
Right.
You don't read. The article is very clear. He says, your brain is in your head. And all your sensations from your body are being processed in your brain. And if we can work from the top down and help that, why work from the bottom up, which is not working because you've already done acupuncture, chiropractic, physical therapy, et cetera. Your back's still hurting. And again, we individualize this. It doesn't apply to everybody, of course. But it may be time to look at the role of tension and stress and all this kind of stuff. So he writes a great article and people don't read it and they write negative comments.
Well, I read it, and the takeaway for me that is this brain is a message center that's interpreting, sending messages to our consciousness about what hurts and what doesn't hurt. And it seems to me that you could take two people with the exact same MRI with a ruptured disc, for example. One is in agony. The other person has no clue he's fine, or they're fine. So there's an interface there called the brain that seems to be pretty important in this little.
So the term "it's in your head," which is very negative connotations because it implies it's imaginary, is actually science. Because your brain is in your head. It's the most important organ. As you say, it's accepting all of these messages and analyzing them and determining what is important and what is not. And if it turns out you're going through a rough patch in your life, like a pandemic or relationship issues or job issues, you're going to be hyped up more. Your nervous system is more hyped up, and your pain is going to be amplified. And we have techniques that are used that are described in these studies and in my book and in Sarno's book and my website, mindbodymedicine.com, and elsewhere that help you to get better from these things. So this is about really getting better from chronic pain and other symptoms by using the most important part of your body, the stuff above your neck, your brain, your head.
And for those that don't know, the book is called Think Away Your Pain. I downloaded it and read it a long time ago. So as I recall, it's available. You can probably get it from your website, but I recall just downloading it from Apple Books.
Amazon, Kindle, Audible, iTunes, Barnes and Noble. It's available in a lot of places, especially in the virtual editions, but Amazon has the print edition as well. And Audible obviously does that, has that monopoly. Yeah. That'll be another podcast. We'll talk about monopolies and things like that. But in terms of this one, and what I've done recently, I've been doing groups. I've been doing Zoom groups with patients during the pandemic. That's another thing that the pandemic has taught us, how much we can do, just like this interview tonight, how much we can do on Zoom. And it's amazing how people can support each other and learn a lot when we have 6 or 8 patients on Zoom with myself and a psychologist. So we did the groups for a whole year, and we decided to create a course, an online course. Mm-hmm. And so, you have a book, you read a book, et cetera, but how do you go beyond that? You want to hear the doctor, you want to get that calming message, you want to really go deeper on this stuff. So we created a 5-hour course of videos, which we edited professionally and all of that. And it's called the Mind-Body Healing Journey. Okay. Because my experience with pain is that people have a journey to heal, and the path is a little different for everybody. It's a winding path, I visualize it. And I'm kind of like the guide on the path, but the patient is the one that really is the key figure on the path that has to do the healing. So this Mind-Body Healing Journey course can be linked on my website, mindbodymedicine.com/online-course, or you can go to the main page and find it. And it's a pretty in-depth look at this stuff. Listeners tonight, if you use the coupon code SELF25, you get 25% off the course for listening to the show.
Well, you will send me those links separately. They will be all available on the descriptive things.
All right. Well, maybe we'll even give you a Bill 25 code so you can have.
No, because then I'm going to be accountable for how many people listened. Whatever your things are.
We can track those.
I don't want to be tracked. I don't want to be reminded, of my loneliness out here.
Oh, no. Bill, it's a growing audience. It's the people who listen are the elite. They're really the emotional, psychological, musical, and intellectual elite of America who are following you, listening to your guests like myself. And they're really an impressive group of people from what I've heard about them from you.
I can't wait to meet some of them,
there's your sister and there's your uncle, and there's some impressive people in the group.
This whole mind-body paradigm wasn't something that you just picked a major and I want to make this as a discipline. This was something that you went through and you experienced personally. You went through your own gauntlet, as I read, as a young man in your book, Think Away Your Pain. And so this was something that you needed for yourself as much as for others.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was a basketball player and a runner. Those were my recreational activities in college and into medical school. And that's how I relieve my stress. And you get into medical school and I was in a tiny apartment in Manhattan looking out at a brick wall and, I'm the concrete jungle of New York City. And I wasn't happy with the memorization. I don't have to give you my whole sob story, but the point is it wasn't a happy first year of medical school. And I started to get knee pain. And of course, I attributed it to the running and the basketball, although I had done plenty of that before without knee pain. So I go to the usual doctors at NYU, the student health, the orthopedist. Nobody can fix me. You know, they give me some medications and shots and this kind of stuff. And I walked into the office of John Sarno, who is a rehabilitation professor. And I said to him, Dr. Sarno, I'm having this knee pain. Maybe you can recommend some physical therapy for me or something, because I'm just not getting better. And he asked me a few questions and he looked at me and he goes, I don't know how you'll take this, son, but 98% of this chronic pain is psychosomatic. And I felt like I was getting hit by a blast of Arctic air. It was like an out-of-body experience. And he said, I see you're a little skeptical, but you can come to my seminar next week that I give to patients and see what you think. And I figured, what do I have to lose? Mm-hmm. So I go to the seminar. There's a lot of well-dressed Upper East Side, Upper West Side people, 30s, 40s, 50s, some in the 60s. And then me, 21-year-old medical student with corduroy pants and a plaid shirt. I wasn't wearing the hat that you have today, but okay. I had the rest of your outfit. Yeah. Okay. And I'm sitting in there and I'm listening and I go, wait a second, this makes sense. He's talking about me. He's talking about people who are hard on themselves, perfectionists, self-critical, warriors, whatever. And I'm going, wait a second, he's talking about me. And yeah, this makes sense. The brain, the limbic system, the emotions, the stress. And this is it. It's got the reason why my knee's not getting better. So I go home that night. I sit down on my tiny little bed in my tiny little apartment. And I felt like a weight was lifting off of me.
Right.
And over the next few weeks, I was examined by Dr. Sarno, made a diagnosis, and I went to his additional seminars. The pain went away. I started running. I started playing basketball. This personal experience that I had was so powerful that it directed my career to a certain degree in this mind-body area. It also gives me, obviously, a credibility to be able to share my own personal success in the healing journey. It's a fascinating area of medicine because it's more about talking and thinking and writing. It's kind of like the humanities side of medicine rather than the hard science of medicine or the invasive science of medicine. You know, I also do some of that stuff, the injections and the shoulders and, you know, blood drawing and this sort of thing. I mean, patients need that too. But this is kind of more on the intellectual, conversational, educational, psychological side.
Well, it seems like a lot of the responsibility comes back to the patient. You know, you have to kind of work through this. My own experience, I've had a few back surgeries.
Yeah, you have.
And I've had really great outcomes. And I know there's a lot of people that don't. You know, I've been really fortunate. I'm doing everything I've ever done. And over each of these sort of crisis periods in my life where I was in severe agony, if I took the glassy overlay and laid it over that graph, that was also when I had major girlfriend trauma in my life. Somehow professional stuff doesn't really get into my body. Yeah. Like I can handle it. Yeah, my career is a nightmare. Nothing's going right, but I'm still happy. It's okay. But to some of these other things with the relationships and the girls, I have a harder time processing it. And I can see very clearly as I get in my drone and look down on my life, these moments in my life, you know, match up to where I've had severe pain. So then I thought, well, then maybe the surgeries I didn't really need. Maybe the real benefit of the surgery was like the 6-week timeout I got from everything that was like on my mind because of just recovery. I'm not sure, but
yeah. Well, you know, Deepak Chopra, the doctor and writer, says that illness is Western man's way of meditating. So think about that for a second. Now people are meditating more, of course, in this country, but India, everybody meditates. It's a very spiritual, religious country. Has a lot of other problems, but I mean, that's something that they're good at.
Right.
And in the Western world, you kind of have to have a sick day in order to get a mental health recovery. You have to kind of get an illness in order to have a week at home and to be able to put your feet up. So maybe if we take more time as a society to breathe, to walk, to meditate, to write, then maybe we will see less of the epidemic of psychophysiologic disorders that we have now. I could transition that into the fact that on the nonprofit side, I've been developing a curriculum for adolescents to learn about the importance of stress and mind-body connection and that sort of thing. And I've written a curriculum for high schools. It's being piloted at a couple of high schools. I've written a workbook for teenagers to teach them about journaling. So the ultimate prevention of disease is to educate the young people in these dynamics so that they don't have to end up in medical school with knee pain, or they don't have to end up with an ulcer later on or headache or something else that might have a tension-related component.
Cumulative effect of tension over a lifespan can also cause issues.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I was Sigmund Freud, I would say to you, relationship problem. So tell me about your mother, Bill. But I won't say that because it's not in my business.
Well, and I'll tell you, we went to see My Fair Lady 2 weeks ago. We had a great time.
What was your childhood like, Bill?
I think I was happy. I basically never missed a vacation. I don't recall ever missing a meal. I was young enough to miss Vietnam. I grew up in the kind of suburban sameness of the San Fernando Valley, went to public schools, got into UC Berkeley, dispensed with my virginity in a timely fashion. I don't know. I think my life was okay. So I don't know how to make sense of it.
So, as you were starting to allude to, trauma in childhood can be one of the factors that we look at when we start peeling back the layers of the onion to understand chronic pain. For some people, it's more about just they were misdiagnosed and they need to hear the correct diagnosis that there's nothing seriously wrong. And that actually takes away the fear and the threat and all of that. But for other people, they have to go deeper into the childhood traumas, childhood issues, sometimes abuse.
Yes.
Sometimes pretty heavy stuff, sometimes milder stuff. Sometimes you have great parents, but they're not a good fit for you. So, for example, I have patients who are very mellow and their parents are very high achieving. Their parents are decent. They're just very high pressuring people. And they're not a kid that responded to that. On the other hand, maybe their brother ends up at Berkeley and Stanford and all of this kind of stuff because he thrived on that type of pressure in the family. So sometimes it's just a misfit with the parents, because obviously we're all kind of genetically mixed up as far as, we're not identical to our fathers or mothers. We have some combination of their parents' qualities and that sort of thing.
I can say this, growing up in an upper middle class sort of Jewish family and having a grandfather who was very high achieving, two grandfathers, one of whom was president of Warner Brothers, and he was a big movie executive. I didn't really get to know him in any real way.
Was his name Warner?
No, his name was Kalmanson, but my grandfather was like Jack Warner's brain, He started in 1927 and selling those movies, eventually ran the company. He ran the distribution side of the business.
That's some impressive ancestry.
But then there's pressure with that. Like I felt
living up to that, right? So some people have alcoholic parents, and it's not an issue of living up to them. It's an issue of surviving them and then moving on their lives. For you, maybe there's this expectation or these high achieving people that it's hard to kind of match that. Jackie Robinson's kids had a really hard time because, how do you follow Jackie Robinson, right? So,
yeah.
So there's a lot of pressure on people who have these named celebrity or wealthy or successful parents.
I didn't rebel against it. I wanted it.
Yeah.
I as a matter of fact, that's in my hard drive. I want achievement. I want to do my thing. I'm not going to quit, but I've had to kind of realize that no matter how much I try, whatever efforts I put into things, I can't necessarily enforce the outcome. I can do everything I can, but I can't enforce the outcome. It's not like sports sometimes where everything.
Yeah, well, that's a good concept for your listeners, which is this concept of outcome independence, focus on process. And that's actually one of the ways we deal with, believe it or not, with chronic pain, which is we get people to not focus on whether or not they're immediately getting better or the pain's getting better, but more that they're following a process. And I love what you said before about the fact that a lot of this falls on the patient. So a lot of my work becomes empowering the patient to get better rather than fixing them, which is different than maybe in blood pressure. You prescribe a medication, the blood pressure number comes down. In chronic pain work or in holistic treatment of blood pressure, it's about getting the patient to exercise and improve their diet. When it comes to blood pressure, when it comes to pain, it's about getting them to journal or maybe meet with a therapist or come to a group, read a book, listen to a podcast, go to a course. Yeah. And so these things are not just on the doctor, it's on what the patient does.
It's a partnership, and it's all about the larger journey of self-discovery in life. That's something that the big thinkers like, Maimonides, the philosopher, Talmudic scholar, doctor, advisor to kings. Talk about a polymath,
Yeah.
Well, it's always fun to talk to you. I would schedule more checkups, but I'm feeling good.
We should make these episodes. We should call these episodes free range discussion or something. We kind of go all over the place, but it's good.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of it. You're a raconteur and a conversationalist and of course a doctor, but you're also a writer. I really enjoyed the book. I have one last question for you. In view of all the new, I don't know if it's new research or it's affirming research within this mind-body discipline that you've been working on, When you wrote this book, Think Away Your Pain, I don't know, maybe that was 10 or 15 years ago.
It was 2014, so it was about 6-7 years ago.
Okay, all right. Well,
the other book I wrote, the Mind Body Workbook, is 20 years old. My work continues to evolve. I mean, some of it is learning better analogies. Some of it is incorporating the new science along with the old theories. We've put a lot of that into the course. We've tried to make that an up-to-date, comprehensive, focused approach. It's a 5-hour video course with some PDFs as well. And I think in the next year, having just launched the course, I'll take a break for a little while. And then I think I might want to do a second volume of the Mind Body Workbook, which has been my tool that patients use to journal in. It's a 30-day workbook. And so people have asked me for a long time, well, why don't you do another 30 days? And so I have ideas for that. And I'm probably going to try to do that in 2022. I might even do it with my collaborator on the course, Dr. Justin Barker, a psychologist in Los Angeles, because at this point it's kind of fun to have, a younger clinician participating and get his fresh ideas and kind of work together and get some, I'm sure you've written by yourself and you've probably written with other people too. And there's probably pros and cons to both in that regard.
I write by myself every day. It's called stand-up comedy and jokes. So I process my life through jokes. And that's sort of my journaling. I've been doing it for a long time.
Have you ever written things with somebody? Have you ever written a screenplay?
I wrote one screenplay with another person. And I think it's like trying to get the perfect marriage. It's hard. The experience I had was like, I ended up doing all the work and it actually felt more inefficient because actually every idea I wanted to run by this guy. And then so for me, not to say that I wouldn't do it, the effort to find a partner is a little too much.
Look, everybody, things work differently for different people.
Right.
Gilbert and Sullivan seem to do well together.
They did great.
And I don't know how Gershwin, George and Ira. I mean, there's different. But I think because I'm the senior member of the team, it gives me enough control that the workbook the new workbook or the second edition or second volume, whatever I'm going to call it. It will be, I'll be able to have the touches I want, but it still gives me some ideas and inspiration. And I cut him in on the proceeds, so to speak.
The whole thing, the mind body money continuum. Wow, this has been always fun, Dr. Dave. He has my total approval as a friend and a physician and as a raconteur. You've guided me through some tough times, and I feel fortunate that I've gotten through them. And hopefully, I'll whatever's out there in the future, I can navigate it.
Keep smiling, Bill. You're bringing joy and energy to the world, so that's a good thing.
All right, I want to thank you for this pit stop again, and cast some light on where we are, where we're going, the whole navigating the COVID thing, understanding risk, and your own specific field of work in
EMS, you can call it, psychophysiologic disorders, tension myoneural syndrome.
It
has a few different names, but mindbodymedicine.com. You can read more about it if you're not familiar with it and you're listening in. So, all right, man. Yeah, Bill, it was great talking to you. Have a good week.
I'll catch you next time. Folks, I want to thank you for joining me here on A Rebel Without Applause. Till next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean, namaste aloha. See ya.